Hi, I'm Lisa Thibodeau, and I'm the English Program Manager for St. Mary Parish. Today I want to talk to you about our plan, St. Mary Parish, for the teaching of vocabulary. First of all, there's a three-step method that we like for vocabulary development, and it involves verbalizing words, relating words, and enjoying words. And we feel that this process needs to be interactive, and it has to be in all classrooms in listening, reading, writing, and speaking. What does the research say about vocabulary? First of all, let's talk about what it says about the worst way to teach vocabulary. The worst way to teach vocabulary is by having them write the definitions in the words, by having them look them up in a dictionary or a glossary. This is against our policy. It does not help a student understand the meaning of a word. What research says is that a student needs at least 6 exposures to a word. When you talk about struggling students, you get up to 25, 50. Some students need 75 exposures to a word before they can understand it. So 6 is the minimum. It's important that you give these exposures to your students and that you plan for them in your lessons. So we in St. Mary talk about the method known as the Marzano method, the Marzano 6-step method for teaching vocabulary. Research shows that mental images, symbolic representations, and also teaching the meaning first is the best way to teach vocabulary. So let's talk about the 6-step method. The first step in the 6 steps is instruct. Instruct. That means the teacher does the first step. It is not something that the students do first. They don't look up the words. They don't tell you what they think it means. The first step is for the teacher to construct the meaning for the students. It might be with an example. It might be with a description. Many times in our lessons we talk about how would you teach the word catastrophe. That's a pretty big word, catastrophe. Well, when you're trying to teach it, the first thing you do is don't mention the word yet and don't write it on the board. Talk to them about a catastrophe, all right? Talk to them about a hurricane. Talk to them about a tornado, a fire. Ask them, what are those things? And they may say a disaster, a tragedy. They may say other words. And you say, well, there's another word for these things, and it's called a catastrophe, meaning something that happens bad to you. You can also talk to them then about different levels of catastrophe. All right, if I break my fingernail, is that a catastrophe? And most people would probably say no. All right. But what if you say, well, what if I, am getting married tomorrow and I just put diamond polish and spent a fortune on this? Is that a catastrophe? So you can talk to them about stories and construct the meaning for your students. You can do it in many ways. You might do it with an object. Say in science class, if you have to teach pasteurize, bring a milk carton. Show them milk carton. They can relate to that. They all have milk cartons probably in their house. Bring one. Say, did you ever notice that this says pasteurized? Then talk to them about what the process is about pasteurization and Louis Pasteur. Okay, it has to be something they can make that connection with. In math, you might be talking about the word function. Now, a function is a relationship between two things. So you can talk to them before you say the word function, and what that is. You say, well, how does anybody know how much they weighed when they were born? Okay, so someone knows, or if they don't, it might be a smaller class, a younger class. You say, well, guess what? I was 6 pounds 9 ounces. Do you think that's what I weigh now? Well, of course not. All right. And as I have grown up, as my height has gone up, then so has my weight. Someone who's 14 is not 6 pounds 9 ounces anymore. So you could say that weight is a function of height. So then you could show them that weight and height connect and have a relationship, and a function means a relationship between two things. So give them the story, give them the experience that you have before you actually write any words down. If you're talking about, I remember one time, you know, the word was pier, and we're in South Louisiana. We don't say pier, you know, we say wharf. So what I, you know, was like, what is it? What is one of those things, you know, it's kind of wood and it's built out into the water and you might fish off of it or something. Oh, wharf, a bulkhead. They're saying their words. Like, you know what? That's the same thing as a pier. Do y'all know that word? Everybody say that word. All right, so make the connections to their life and what they have. The more that you do that, the better they're going to not only understand the word, but remember it for a long time. Another way you can help instruct is to have them, you know, to act it out or have them act it out. All right. Does anybody know what it is when you act in an agitated state? You know, can someone show me that? All right. How about glance? Can you glance over at another thing? Does anybody know how to do that? Let's everybody glance over to the board. Right? So anything you can have them do. And a lot of times they think this is fun. Or tell a story. I used to tell a story about naive people. And I would just tell the story about people doing things that were naive. And then say, you know what that is? That means they're naive. Right? So construct the meaning for them is step one of the most important steps. Step two is restate. At this point, you need the students to recognize that what you have said or the story you've said about this word, that they can say it in some way. They might have to tell you a description. They might say, well, can you think of another example of a catastrophe? Okay. Is there another word that you know of for wharf? Okay. And they might, you know, say bulkhead or deck or something like that. So you want them to be able to say it, restate it in their own words in step two. When we talk about step 2 and 3, step 3 is create. Those can kind of be interchangeable because they might create something as they're restating it. Giving them examples and non-examples are also good. All right, I'm going to tell you, you know, we talked about what a catastrophe is. I'm going to give you 5 things. Tell me which one's not a catastrophe, something like that. You can use vocabulary cards for this. You can use learning logs, interactive notebooks. A lot of times what's great is in step 3, have them do a mental picture. When you can draw something, you can't draw something unless you understand it. If you don't understand the word, then whatever you draw is not going to be the meaning. So as a teacher, you can look at that. If they draw a comic strip or just a stick figure, it doesn't have to be artwork, people. But you as a teacher will be able to see, no, that's not exactly what that word means. And you can probably also tell, where their confusion is by the picture. So having them construct a picture, a symbol, a graphic representation, an example of it, draw one for me. The Frayer model, the 4 squares of vocabulary is a very common way where, you write the word in one. You might do an example in one. You might have a synonym or an antonym. You might have a sentence. It all depends what you want in those squares, but one is usually some type of mental picture of it. So when they could create a symbol of it, an example of it, a graphic of it, an actual picture of it, something that is showing you they understand when you gave them that instruction. Excuse me. Step 4 is engage. Maybe when you were creating and they were restating, they were engaging. Sometimes, all 3 steps can be done together. But maybe they created something by themselves. Then you want them to engage with something else. Take these words that we all have been talking about, put them in categories. Which words are about government? Which words are about a country? Which words are about dictators or whatever? Put them in categories. That shows that they can engage and they understand. Analogies can be another way. You know, they can say Halloween is to a ghost as Easter is to, and they could say a bunny or a basket or a chick, whatever, according to their experience. But have them make those connections and engage with the words. They might do a little collage, you know, from magazines, things like that, to engage in. The fifth step is to discuss. It's very important for them to then discuss it. So they've created this, then they need to either come in front of the class and talk about it, turn and talk to their neighbor, their partner about it, maybe in a group. You know, they don't all have to do all the words. So say you have 8 words, you know, they don't have to do them all. You can have a group of 4, each of them do 2. You can have this group of 4 does the first 4 words, the next group of 4 does the next 4 words. And then when they talk about it to each other, they're learning all of those words. And plus you did step 1 where you instructed it anyway. You know, turn and talk, that conversation, many teachers don't recognize the power of that conversation, and we skip over it. It's a great closure. It's a great opportunity for students to be able to verbalize and say and understand not only vocabulary, but what your content was for that day. So turn and talk is a very easy way for you to have the students take what you've learned and actually have to do something with it. Please use that strategy. It's an excellent strategy. It promotes learning. The last step is another step that sometimes is not taken seriously, and that's play. Step 6 is play. Let them play with the words. They think they're having a good time. They think you're giving a free day. If they're playing Pictionary, hello, they think they're having a good time in class. And yet you had planned it all along because they're using the content, that critical vocabulary. And to be able to draw that picture, they've got to understand it. And then to be able to guess it, they've got to understand it. So games such as crosswords, Jeopardy, charades, acting out your words, as I said, Pictionary. Remember the old game show Password where they give clues to guess a word? They can do that too. Even word search and crosswords are important parts of this step. Games are a valid instructional tool. Okay, so as long as the game has to do with the content, a lot of times when teachers get in trouble or someone asks them, well, you know, why are they playing this game? Is because they're playing, you know, Trouble or something that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with your content. But there are many games that can be a valid instructional tool. And when it comes to vocabulary, that's one of the best ways. So develop different types of games that your students can play using their words. So let's talk about this process again. Remember, instruct, that's teacher, then restate and create and engage. All of those things can kind of come together. Make sure you give the students time to discuss and then also to play with the words. Now, you might be thinking, hello, can I do this with all of these words? That's a lot. First of all, you have to look at your vocabulary. There are some vocabulary words that should be just incidental. You come across it in, you know, you say they come across pantry. Pantry, what's a pantry? Maybe they don't use that term. Say, you know, it's just a room in your house where you keep groceries. It might be a closet, it might be a room. You just keep groceries there. That's a pantry. Everybody say pantry? All right, so if I would put in this closet here and I'd put groceries, what is that? It's a pantry. That's all you have to do. It's not a critical term. So incidental, just tell them a story, tell them something. It doesn't really require instruction. Then you have academic vocabulary. This is words that require some exposure, but it's not critical vocabulary to your content. So when you come to an academic word, then you want to verbalize it, mention it to them, and help them make some kind of relationship. It might be a word like misfortune. You know, it might be something like they talk about an author, a scientist, a historian, whatever in your content, and they say, you know, he had a lot of misfortunes. So you could say, okay, do you see a word in it that you know? And they might say fortune. Okay, do you know a word part? Do you know that word part miss? What does that usually mean? Okay, if you talk to them about that, they could probably figure out misfortune. So help them make the relationship. But again, do you have to do all 6 steps? No. You might do 1 or 2 steps for that type of vocabulary. The one that you need to do all 6 steps for, that's the critical vocabulary. The critical vocabulary that if they don't understand, they won't be able to understand or complete the next unit, the next chapter. They won't be able to do the science experiment. They won't be able to perform the equations that you're going to have. They won't be able to understand the plot of a story. They won't be able to understand the cause and effect of the war. Whatever it is in your subject matter, in your course, that's critical to the understanding and the basic standards that you need to cover. Those critical vocabulary words, you need to identify them. And in some of our instructional calendars, they're already identified for you. But those words, you should try to go through all 6 steps. And you need to plan for that, not just randomly. You know that you've got to give some instruction. That should be in your plans. You know you have to give them time to create or engage. It should be an activity in your plan. You know you want to give them something to play with the words. That should be in your plan. Additionally, the vocabulary should be on your test. And ideally, it should be tested the same way it is on the LEAP, which is an A-B question. So that it is not just figure out the context of this word, but then which words or what part of the story, what part of the paragraph gave you the idea of the meaning in part A. That is the best way to teach vocabulary, and that is St. Mary's plan for vocabulary. Thank you for listening, and if you have any other questions, please contact your instructional staff member or your program manager. I also want to remind you that these steps can be found on your course Blackboard site. All of the program managers have these signs, as well as one for elementary, one for secondary, the signs that you can post in your classroom to keep reminding you of how those 6 steps go. Also in our instructional calendars, usually in the introduction, we have the 6-step process, because this is St. Mary's plan for vocabulary instruction. Thank you so much for listening.